This is The Billionaire's Second Chance, Book 4 of the Benton Brothers Family Romance Series, by Kimberly Krey. Chapter 1. Viv slipped one foot into her leather pump while fastening her earring. "I want you guys to practice your times tables with Grandma while I'm gone, okay?" On went the next pump, followed by the next earring, small gold studs to match the thin chain around her neck. "We will," Dante promised from the other room. "And Diego still has to write his sorry letter to Ms. Wilson. Let me worry about Diego's note, okay?" Viv strode to the full-length mirror beside the large window. A window that lent light and warmth, like the others placed amply throughout the old home. She'd grown attached to this house since purchasing it for renovation 6 months ago. It offered more natural lighting than any home she'd flipped to date. She'd miss it once it was time to sell. The sound of shuffling footsteps came from behind just as Viv spotted Diego entering the room with his gloom face on. "I don't know why I have to write a dumb letter," he grumbled under his breath. "Because you disrupted the class," called Dante, still on the other side of the wall. "I wasn't asking you," Diego spat over his shoulder. "I said I'd take care of it, Dante," Viv assured, recalling the note his teacher sent home. Something about Diego distracting the class by doing some sort of dance during math. Most likely the butt-shaking dance he did so often around the house. "I was just happy that I got the whiteboard problem right for once. I didn't even do it for very long." "I know, mio caro," Viv assured. "And I sat down as soon as she told me." He persisted. "But you waved at everyone first and made all the girls laugh," Dante blurted. Diego clenched his fists. "Shut up, Dante." "Dante," Viv warned. "Say one more thing about it, and I'm going to make you write a letter about butting into your brother's business." Diego's expression shifted, revealing hints of a grin at her threat. "He thinks just 'cause we're twins he can be all up in my business." Viv hid a grin while striding across the room toward him. "It probably comes with the territory," she said in a whisper. "But listen, I'm glad you're getting the hang of those math problems, and as long as you try your best not to disrupt the class, we won't have a problem, okay?" Diego nodded. "Fine." He spun around, headed out the door, but stopped short and added one more thing. "The girls that laughed while I waved at them? They brought notes to my table during lunch." Viv lifted a brow. "What did the notes say?" He did a one-shoulder shrug. "You're cute," and stuff like that. She grinned and tousled his thick brown hair with her fingers. "You are cute," he shrugged again. "I look exactly like Dante," he said in a whisper. They should have given one to him, too. Warm tugs pulled at Viv's mommy heart. "You think it hurt his feelings that he didn't get one, too?" Diego nodded. "What people look like has less to do with attraction than some people think. There will be lots of girls that like you guys for different reasons. That's how love works." A knock came to the front door, Mom's indication that she was about to let herself in with the key code. "Grandma's here," Dante chimed from the other room. Diego darted down the hall without another word to welcome her as well. Mom's usual greeting rang out. "Luz de mie oki, light of my eyes." Viv's thoughts were still stuck on her conversation with Diego and the unique dynamics between twins. About the insecurities that constant comparison could bring. She'd never forgotten what Duke Benton, the only identical twin she'd known before having her own, had said on the topic. "Once people put you in a box, it's hard to climb out of it." A hot sting pricked a tiny corner of her heart at the recollection. At the end of their freshman year at Stanford, Duke had thoroughly broken her heart, proving just how difficult breaking out of that box really was. "So, who are you going to be interviewing next, Verita?" her mom asked as Viv joined them in the front room. Mom used her pen name when asking questions about her job as a freelance writer. Viv opened her mouth to answer the question, but stopped short as the name escaped her. She thought back on her conversation with Riley Shea from Slipper Magazine, still unable to recall it. "You know what? I'm not sure that she told me." "When are you gonna interview Batman?" Dante asked. "Batman's not real," Diego said. "I mean the actor who played Batman," Dante corrected. "She did interview one of the men who played him, Mom chimed. Right, hun? Yep, I did. Viv led the crew into the kitchen, still perplexed about her upcoming interview. How could I have not asked who I was interviewing? I want you to talk to the new Batman. And get a picture with him, Dante continued. Maybe someday I will. Viv stepped over to the butcher block, a gorgeous custom piece that wheeled over to the window to double as a breakfast bar, and snatched the ring of Times Tables cards from its nook. They're doing 8s right now, she said to her mom. Mom's eyes lit up. Oh, 8? That's how old you guys are. Until next month, Diego said. That's right, she agreed. You guys have a birthday coming up, but we get to go to Disneyland first, Dante cheered. That they did. Viv's mom and dad were taking the twins to celebrate over spring break, a fact the boys talked about at least 300 times a day. Viv had chosen to stay back and refinish the deck, something that might not happen if the interview took her out of town. You really don't know who your interview's with? Her mom asked again. Viv shook her head. I know, it's weird. Sure, she needed the money. Half of what she'd made on her last house was in a savings bond and the other half was dwindling fast with the renovations for this one. But accepting a job without knowing her subject? She'd never done that before. You know what? She decided while hurrying over to the fridge and snatching a cheese stick from the drawer. I trust Slipper that it'll be somebody worth interviewing. I think she said he's getting like a 12-page spread with a photo shoot, the works. Sounded like I might get to travel to someplace exotic for the shoot during the process. Ooh, that would be neat, her mom said. So it's a he, not a she, Viv shrugged. That's the impression I have. But you're not sure, Mom said in her thinking voice. Would we get to come too? If it's somewhere exotic? Diego asked. Viv leaned down, captured the little guy's face between her hands, and planted a kiss to his forehead. Probably not, mio caro. She did the same with Dante. I better get going. She tossed an arm around her mom and gave her a squeeze. Thanks again for helping with the boys. It's my absolute pleasure, Mom cooed. And well, Viv knew it. Thank heavens the twins had such loving, involved grandparents. Viv couldn't imagine playing the role of single mother without them. Mom followed her through the dining room and toward the front door. So, are you going to meet him today? The guy you're interviewing? Her mom was a real fangirl of several of Hollywood's finest. Already Viv had interviewed one of her favorites, which said something considering Viv's unique specialty. She only interviewed high-profile people whose reputation had been soiled in some way, those needing redemption. I bet it's one of 3 people, Mom said. Thomas Finsley, from all of those soap operas. Yep, that one made sense after word of his recent affairs hit the news. The gold medalist who got caught fraternizing with one of the judges. Mom guessed again. What's her name? Leona Stone? Viv provided. That's it. So, who's the third one? Viv looped the strap of her purse over her shoulder before second-guessing herself. She creaked open the custom bench seat where she stashed some of her extra handbags. I really do love this home, Vivia, her mother said. I mean, you're going to have a hard time parting with it when the time comes. Viv nodded, feeling the truth of it in her gut. I know, but I've got a lot of money tied up in it. Plus, I want to keep renovating other homes in the valley, you know? To up the value in this area? Her mom sighed. I know. I love that about you. Her eyes widened suddenly. I can't wait to hear who your interview's with, Viv smiled. I'll call you as soon as my meeting's over. Bye, guys. She gave the twins a final wave. A waft of warmth greeted her on the sunlit porch. Her shadow stretched over the pavement as she hurried down the porch steps toward her car. I didn't tell you who I think the third one could be, Mom called. Viv pointed her remote at her Mustang until it let out a beep. Who is it? When the reply didn't come right away, Viv glanced over her shoulder. Hesitation played over Mom's face. Pinched lips and that heavy tilt of her head. I don't know if I should say. Viv scrunched her forehead. Why? Because it's... Well, due to that whole scandal with the live TV wedding and all, It just seems like Duke Benton is probably seeking redemption about now. Viv felt the blood drain from her face and rush like lava to her heart. "Oh. I'm sorry," Mom said. "Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it. I know how you feel about him." "No," Viv assured as she climbed behind the steering wheel. "It's fine. And let's just hope that it's not him." She closed the door and gripped onto the wheel with both hands. Viv released 2 heavy sighs before sliding the key into the ignition. The muffled sound of Mom's voice carried beyond the windows. With the press of a button, Viv slid the passenger side down. "Yeah? What would you do if it was?" she called. A knot of anger dug into the center of Viv's chest as she considered that. A shot at redemption? From me, of all people? A cold laugh slipped from her lips. "That's not going to happen." Now Mom was racing down the steps, holding a hand to her chest as she went. "Vivia Maria Tripoli," she started. "You can't go by the name Verita and give someone a biased report. That's not how we raised you." But Viv only grinned. "I know that. If it ends up being Duke, then I'll reject the job altogether." With that, Viv turned to look over her shoulder and backed onto the street. She forced herself to breathe out through pursed lips, slowly against the wild thumping in her chest. The sidewalks of the neighborhood might be quiet and calm, but the sudden spike in Viv's heart, the frantic voices in her mind, were anything but. She shook her head. "Please don't let it be Duke Benton."
Chapter 2. Duke adjusted his tie, smoothed a hand down the front of his suit coat, and stared out the window of Slipper Magazine's office suite. It was a different perspective from that outside his office, but it looked close to the same. Sunny skies, busy sidewalks with manicured hedges, and tall, swaying palms. LA was beautiful no matter how he looked at it, even if the city had turned against him. "Would you stop pacing?" Perry asked from his seat at the oblong table. Duke slipped his hand into his pocket and thumbed the small, smooth stone within. Some called it a worry stone, but Duke liked what his father called it best, a calming stone. "I'm not pacing," he said, eyes stuck on the view. "Do you really think a magazine interview is the answer? Why not just take one of the TV interviews? They had some big names asking to interview him after all." "If you're going to make me repeat myself," his public rep said, "then I'll say it again." A playback of the exhaustive conversation shot to Duke's mind. "No, don't. I remember." He'd heard enough about how the station would likely take 10 or 15 minutes tops, stretch it into an hour-long segment, and play misleading out-of-context tidbits to lure viewers into watching. In the end, the program could paint him with whatever persona they'd like to portray. Duke's phone buzzed from his other pocket. He was quick to retrieve it and give the screen a glance. He had some important deals to close that afternoon. But the message wasn't from the office. "Grandma Lowe, guess who Stanford's alumni gala is featuring for their scholarship fundraiser this year?" "Duke, who?" "Grandma Lowe, your father." A smile crossed his lips. A spot of warmth stirred in his chest. Dad. If only he and Grandpa were there to enjoy the tribute. It had been 7 years since the private plane crash that took them both. An ache settled into his chest as he pictured the 2 men, accompanied by his brother, Winston. Watching from their place in the heavens, Duke tapped out a text in return. "That's awesome," Grandma Lowe texted back. "And they'd like you and Sylvia Sampson to announce the award together on a live feed. She's back in town, you know, and her engagement just fell through." Oh, great. Duke knew where Grandma was taking this, and he wasn't interested. Another text popped in. "It'd be great if the 2 of you went together. She mentioned that you took her to the Starry Night prom at Stanford 10 years ago. No, it wouldn't be great. That prom marked one of the dumbest decisions Duke had ever made. Losing him a woman he still hadn't gotten over." Duke shook his head. For all he knew, his grandma had been the one to arrange for him and Sylvia to introduce as a duo. The Sampsons had a big name, after all. She was probably trying to help him repair the damage done to the Benton family's image, an image he'd tarnished with the whole marriage swap thing. "Duke, I'll keep her in mind." He slipped the phone back into his pocket after hitting send. His refusal to commit wouldn't surprise her. Lorraine knew how picky he was, which probably added to her concern that Duke would turn into a chronic bachelor, especially now that the rest of his siblings were married. Funny that James, the youngest of the pack since Winston died, had set things into motion. Like the first domino to drop, he fell for and married his private chef, Camilla. Months later, Betsy followed, saying I do to her childhood friend Sawyer. Then came Duke's twin, Xander, at the start of the year. Of course, that one was different. That wedding marked the moment Duke dodged his duty of stepping up to the altar to marry a perfect stranger on live TV, which began his plummet in the popularity rankings. He'd gone from being the most adored Benton to the least. Even his very own fans turned against him. The thought led him back to the matter at hand, causing him to huff out an irritated breath. I make one tiny mistake and everyone's mad at me, Perry chuckled under his breath. One tiny mistake? He squeaked. Which part was the mistake? The part where you signed up for married at first meet, knowing you weren't going to follow through with it if you got picked? Or was it the moment you decided, after the social experiment selected you out of 30,000+ candidates, to not even show up to the wedding? Wait, I know the mistake you're talking about, his public relations rep continued. It must be the moment you allowed your identical twin to step into your place, marry a woman handpicked for you, and fall in love with her while all of America watched. That's the one tiny mistake you're talking about, right? Duke rubbed his thumb over the divot in his pocket stone, back and forth. You know what? You're fired, Perry chuckled under his breath. That's what you always say. But trust me, you should be thanking me. Everyone wants to get interviewed by Verita. Do you think that's her real name or just some pen name? Duke wandered to the other side of the green room to a small bar. A crystal jar with a spout held ice water with lemon slices. A row of upside-down glasses stood nearby. He poured himself some water as Perry replied, Verita means truth in Italian. The woman says she's a truth seeker. She prides herself on it. Duke furrowed his brow as he brought the glass to his lips. He paused before taking a sip. The truth, huh? A question came to mind, but rather than speak it aloud, Duke swallowed it down. What if the truth about Duke Benton wasn't all that interesting? The thought pricked at a deep fear of his, one he worked to keep far from reach. The same fear that threatened to roar its ugly head the more his public image tanked. Shards of anxiety shot through him as he indulged that fear, the fear of being irrelevant, unimportant, invisible. His phone let out another buzz. Duke tugged it from his pocket, anxious for an escape from the thoughts in his head. It was Grandma again, but this time she was calling, not texting. I'll be right back. Quickly, Duke strode out of the room and headed straight for the stairwell. Hello? She's in town, you know, Grandma said on the other end of the line. She got in yesterday and came straight to the boutique to cancel the order on her dress. You should hear what that guy did to her. Awful. Chances were she'd done a lot worse to him, but Duke didn't say so. Instead, he took the stairs like it was part of his workout routine, grateful to blow off the steam boiling beneath the surface. You're talking about Sylvia Sampson? Yes, Sylvia. Who else? She said. She asked about you. Said it would do her a lot of good to be seen with you on her arm right now, after what happened to her, and I think it'd boost your image as well. Duke rounded the landing and headed down the next flight. It would help my image to take Sylvia? The Sampsons hold a lot of clout in L.A., Grandma replied. And they don't come much prettier than her. Duke rounded the final landing before gripping the banister and heading back up. She's not really my type, Grandma. In fact, she's kind of a brat. It's one night, Grandma urged. You'll be announcing together already. Why not make it a date? Because I don't want to give her the wrong idea, that's why. She only wants it for her image, Grandma specified. She's fresh off a breakup, for crying out loud. Man, she wasn't going to let up, was she? Fine, he finally said. I'll think about it. That's my sweet grandson. Mark the last weekend of June for the gala, will you? That's about 2 months from now. Duke had reached the 17th floor, Slipper Magazine's floor, but rather than go back to the green room, he headed up to the rooftop instead. Something was getting under his skin, something beyond the obvious irritations vying for his attention. You know who Verita is? He asked. Is that who's interviewing you for your feature with Slipper? Yeah. Wow. When she left it there, Duke prodded. Wow, what? Is that good or bad? No, it's good. It's really good, actually. She's just, well, I'd say honest at all costs. She should help people see you clearly, and that's wonderful because you are an incredible guy. An incredible guy, huh? Duke didn't feel incredible. He felt irrelevant. Each of his siblings seemed to be in newlywed bliss, and the public was eating it up with a spoon, gushing over every lame thing the couples did together. Oh, looks like James is still treating his culinary princess like a queen, besides some picture of the two out for dinner. Or Betsy and Sawyer caught test driving a new $1 million machine. Will the two get a matching pair, his and hers? Why did anyone care? But they did. They cared more than they did about what he was doing. "Duke," came Grandma's voice through the line. "You still there?" "Yeah, I'm here. But I should probably get back to the meeting. It's about to start." "Okay. Good luck. Oh, and tell Verita I'm a fan, will you? I've got a good feeling about this." "Will do," Duke said, before disconnecting the line. Grandma had a good feeling about it, did she? He sucked in a breath as he looked over the landscape. At least one of them did.
Chapter 3. A spark of anticipation flittered through Viv as the elevator glided up to the 17th floor. She was about to meet her new subject. The elevator slowed, dinged, and retracted its glass doors with a hum. Once they were open, a new inner hum picked up, an agitating one at that, the sort that came when life was about to take one of its turns. Viv shook it off, lifted her head, and proceeded toward the wide corridor leading to Slipper Magazine's suite. Life had taken a very unexpected turn when the twins came along, big enough to last a lifetime. Whatever awaited her beyond the bend was small stuff in comparison. Viv had been in the particular green room twice before. It had glass walls, which, she realized as she turned the corner, would reveal just who her subject was before they were face to face. The inner plea picked up once more. Please don't be Duke Benton. Why she was entertaining Mom's suggestion, Viv couldn't be sure. Probably because he was exactly the type of guy people wanted to get their hands on, a sexy billionaire bachelor to put on their cover, one with a bad boy edge and a scandal at his heels. Her eyes searched over the scene within the room as she approached it. There stood Riley Shea, editor-in-chief, perfectly poised in a pencil skirt and heels at the head of the table. She recognized Rico Chimois, the famous designer who'd spotlighted his spring line on live TV just last week. But the man sitting across from Rico, tall, thin, and visibly restless with a bouncing leg and fidgeting fingers, Viv didn't recognize him. She tried not to get discouraged. A lot of important people were known for what they'd done, not what they looked like. Perhaps the guy was CEO of the nation's fastest rising company. Maybe he'd just blown millions somehow, put thousands out of a job with his reckless behavior, and needed to man up and publicly take the blame. The man's eyes followed her as she approached the double doors, gripped the rose gold handle to pull it open, and stepped inside. Or perhaps he was looking at something else, she realized, as his gaze seemed to follow a different route. She glanced over her shoulder and came up empty. "Thank you for joining us, Vivia." Riley Shea motioned to the seat beside Rico. "We've got our lady of the hour here. We're just waiting for the man of the hour to join us next." He had to step out for a moment. Wait, skinny guy wasn't him? Viv's eyes shot to the guy across from her in question. "Oh, forgive me. You've met Rico, I know," Ms. Shea said. "Good afternoon, Verita," Rico said with a grin. Viv returned the smile, hoping it looked more natural than it felt with as preoccupied as she was. "And to you. And this is Public Relations Specialist, Perry Klein." The guy did a half-stand and extended his arm across the table. "Pleasure to meet you. I'm a big fan of your work." Viv shook his hand. "Thank you. We're all big fans of your work, Verita, and we feel honored that you'll be joining us in this highly anticipated feature." "Happy to be part of it," she assured. "My client may be adventuresome," Mr. Klein allowed as he settled back into his seat. "But I think you'll find that much of his bad boy reputation is more implied than it is earned." "Oh no, please don't say it. Please don't be Duke Benton. Please don't." "Sorry I'm late," came a deep and far too familiar voice. The view of him in her periphery sent a rush of goosebumps scurrying up her arms. Their past had haunted her enough that he was like a ghost to her, a living, breathing one who had just stepped into the very same room. Viv ducked her chin as the shock had its way with her, determined not to meet eyes with him just yet. He surprised her by heading over to not Mr. Klein's side, but hers. The man shook Rico's hand first. "Always a pleasure to work with your family," Rico said. "And you must be Verita," the deep voice crooned. The massive heart pounds got even louder in her head. Viv gulped, nodded slightly, and forced her shoulders to rise. Her chin followed the upward motion and, at last, her gaze did the same. An impressive three-piece suit, an even more impressive stature beneath it, and the very face that had haunted her all that time. "Hi, Duke." Those two words hadn't fallen from her lips in years. Goosebumps rushed over her skin once more, but it wasn't enough to stop an ache from settling deep into her heart. Those eyes, dark blue and piercing, widened at the sight of her.
Vivi? Chapter 4. Duke couldn't recall a time he'd lost ability to speak, but as he took in the beautiful woman before him, flushed cheeks and guarded eyes, all he could think was wow. His pulse spiked into a new pace. "You two know each other?" stammered a voice from behind. Vivi Tripoli tore her gaze from Duke and tilted her head to see past him. "Yes, and I'm afraid that fact might alter my decision about taking the job." "What? No. Oh, I certainly hope not," the editor-in-chief said. Perry cleared his throat from his place across the table. Duke glanced over, and Perry jutted his chin toward the empty seat beside him. It took him a moment to interpret the cue, but once he did, Duke straightened his posture and rounded the table, his eyes fixed directly on the seat he moved toward. Vivi Tripoli was there in the same room with him, the very woman he'd been thinking of moments ago, thanks to Grandma and her talk of the Starry Night prom. He only hoped to hide how very flustered he was. Pulse racing, blood heating, palms breaking into a sweat. Vivi waited for Duke to take a seat before continuing, her gaze fixed decidedly away from him and on Miss Shea. "I work with a firm policy in mind. Discover the truth and deliver it without bias." Her eyes hardened as she darted a glare in his direction. "I'm afraid I won't be able to stick with that unbiased approach with Mr. Benton, as he and I have a past that long ago influenced my opinion about his character." The words stung and outraged him all at once. "It's been 10 years, Vivi. Don't you think I've changed since then?" Perry rested his hand on the table space in front of Duke. "What he's trying to say is that over the last 10 years, specifically the last 24 months, Duke has transformed. Sadly, his public image hasn't reflected that yet. That's where you come in." Duke watched Vivi's face as she listened to Perry. Jaw clenched, lips tight, and eyes filled with something that looked a lot like pain, a pain that echoed deep in his chest. "We know you're honest," Perry continued. "We're counting on that. I'm not aware of what your past with my client entails, but I'm confident you'll discover a very changed man from the one you knew back then. Will you excuse me?" Vivi shot to her feet suddenly. Halfway to the door, she seemed to remember herself, correcting her posture until her shoulders were high and her steps paced. What she hadn't curbed was the flushed appearance of her cheeks, or the fists she clenched at either side as she walked out of the room. Duke stifled a curse. He wanted nothing more than to watch her every move as she strode down the hall, but a protective part of him sensed she didn't want to be watched. He looked down at the table instead, a fresh ache tearing through him as he considered the way he and Viv broke up, the hurt he'd caused, the stupid choice he'd made that ruined everything, and ironically, the part Sylvia Sampson, the very woman Grandma mentioned, had played in the whole thing. Awkward tension pressed at him from every angle of the room. Even as he kept his gaze on the table, Duke sensed the questioning looks darting across the room. "You heard her," he said. "She doesn't want to do it. Let's go." "I don't think she's made a final decision," said Miss Shea. "Why don't we give her a day to consider? Let's draw up the details of the interview, and we can find a replacement if necessary. My daughter Daisy would be a great alternative, but I won't contact her just yet. How about we see what Vivia decides first, and I'll get in touch with you tomorrow." Duke glanced at Perry in time to catch his pleading puppy dog look. He didn't have it in him to argue, especially since doing the interview would earn him some time with Vivi. Time he desperately wanted, but she wouldn't agree to it, would she? He'd probably be the one person she turned down in her whole career. He couldn't exactly wait around to be rejected in front of the group. "Duke?" Perry urged. "Fine," he said, scooting his chair back and coming to a stand. "You go ahead and work out the details. Send them to me once it's time to sign. I've got to get going." He gave the fashion designer a polite nod, then did the same with Miss Shea as he moved toward the door. Duke wasn't sure where he was headed. He didn't want to go home, but he didn't feel like company. Sure, he had time to swing by the country club and hit a bucket of balls, but even that didn't appeal to him. May as well head back to the office instead and check off the list of details he had waiting for him. Vivi Tripoli. It didn't matter that he'd be running from one place to the next in the hours ahead. She would take up the lion's share of his headspace for who knew how long. He could hardly believe that well-known journalist Verita was the feisty Italian who'd captured his heart in his college freshman year. She was, in the very least, the first woman he ever loved. And if he were being honest, she was probably the only one he'd loved too. Of all the ladies he'd met and dated since then, of all the attraction he'd felt towards several of those ladies, nothing came close to what he'd felt for Vivi. Duke had worried over the years that nothing ever would, not that he could do anything about it. He'd earned every bit of disdain she torched for him, and boy did he regret it. Perhaps if she did agree to interview him, he'd get something he'd been wanting for the last 10 years, something he wanted even more than redemption on a broad and public scale. A second chance with Vivi.
Viv stared at her reflection as a blend of shock and anger pushed through her body. Never had she accepted a job without first learning the subject's name. So why this time, the one time she'd done such a thing, did Duke Benton have to come striding into the room? She spun in place and folded her arms. At one side of the restroom was a sitting area with posh lounge chairs, fresh flowers, and a stack of slipper magazines. At the other side of the vanities were 3 bathroom stalls with floor-to-ceiling doors. Viv hurried over to the closest one, ducked inside, and leaned her back against the door once it was closed. There, she would do something very brave. Braver, possibly, than taking the job itself. She would call her outspoken Italian mother. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Aren't you supposed to be in your meeting?" she hissed from her end of the line. "You were right. It's Duke Benton." Silence. "I can't believe it. He just walked in and what?" An image came to mind. Duke's wide and pompous grin falling flat. He looked as shocked as I probably did. Mom mumbled a few choice words under her breath, an English-Italian combo that was distinctly hers. "I bet he did," she said next. "So what did you tell them?" Viv shook her head as an ache tore through her anew. She couldn't have her reputation soiled by petty drama over a guy from her past. She'd worked hard to get where she had, and managed to score a steady stream of work from the nation's top magazine and newspaper agencies alike. "I told them the truth," she said with a humorless laugh. "What else?" "I said that I wasn't sure if I could give an unbiased report on him, since I'd long ago formed an opinion of him that I doubted he'd be able to change." "Oh." Mom did one of her worried groans. "What did they say?" I excused myself after that. "What?" "Vivia." I had to. I was getting all flush-faced. You know how I get. I just needed a minute to think this through. "I think..." Her mom came, pausing to whisper something to one of the twins. Something about turning off the timer. They'd probably already baked a batch of cookies. Her mother sighed into the phone before continuing. "You already know what I think, Vivia." Yes, she did. Everyone deserves a shot at redemption. Viv agreed. It was why she did what she did. Granted, there were people whose true colors were just as they seemed. When that happened, Viv spoke that truth at the very same volume. "Interviewee beware." "Un minuto," her mom said next. Viv could tell she'd set the phone down to attend to the twins. She let out a sigh of her own. She knew what she had to do. She did, but that didn't mean it would be easy. Viv leaned her head back on the door and glanced up at the tiny chandelier in the stall. So out of place, really. Something so fancy hovering over a woman's toilet. A small laugh slipped from her lips as she recalled the cruel words of Sylvia Sampson. Their professor had asked about the influence of wealth in social circles. "It doesn't matter what decade it is, or how progressive our nation becomes. Money matters." She glared at Viv from across the classroom. Sylvia had openly despised Viv once she found out Viv and Duke were an item. "The lower class might be able to play with the big boys for a while," Sylvia continued. "But eventually, they'll be replaced with someone more suitable." Viv had raised her hand next. "I disagree." "Why's that?" the professor asked. She's speaking for an entire social class based on her own narrow, biased perspective. "History backs me up," Sylvia spat. "And it disproves you too," Viv assured. "That it does," the professor agreed. He posed a different question then, but Viv hadn't shifted so easily. She'd seen the way Sylvia sought Duke out at social events. She had her eyes on him. When Viv left the classroom that day, Sylvia caught up with her just past the doorway.
Enjoy your time with Duke while it lasts. He's just using you. In the end, he'll end up with someone like me. Just watch and see.
Boy, had Sylvia gone the extra mile to prove her point. "Vivia?" her mom asked. "I'm here," she replied. "Just sometimes I still feel like I'm in a place that I don't belong. Not all that glitters is gold, Mia Cara. You know that. You have the gift of perception. It's why you've accomplished so much. Why you never believed anyone was better than you simply because they had more money in their bank account." Viv nodded. Despite the setbacks in her sophomore year, she'd finished school strong and pursued her dream. She'd made a name for herself, too. One she wasn't about to sully by rejecting an interview with one of the nation's hottest bachelors. She sucked in a deep breath. "I'm going to go back in there," Viv announced. "I'll call you when I'm done." "Okay, hun. Speriamo bene." The expression alone caused an image to drift to her mind, one of Mom crossing her fingers for good luck. "Wait," she added. "What are you going to tell them?" Determination rushed in, planting a hot streak of adrenaline through her core. Viv sniffed, nodded, and inhaled with a new burst of confidence. "I'm going to tell them, yes, I'll take the job."
Chapter 5. "What if she doesn't show?" Duke asked as he looked out the window of his private jet. "She'll show," Perry assured through the line. "She's a professional. You think she's going to toss her whole career over an ex-boyfriend? Please." Duke wasn't sure if he was more relieved or offended at the comment. Riley Shea, with the help of famous photographer Z, had come up with a vision for the spread. He didn't know much about it, only that it would highlight the perks of his billionaire lifestyle. For that reason, Vivi, the one who'd be reporting on that lifestyle, would accompany him on his private jet, then stay in his personal multi-million-dollar estate on the island. The irony was rich. The last thing Duke would want to do, if given a second chance with Vivi Tripoli, would be to flash his fortune in her face. She'd come to despise money, something she relayed to him when he tried to get her back a year after the breakup. His mind darted back to that moment. Vivi had moved off campus at that point and was taking several of her courses online from what he'd heard, but he had spoken with her over the phone. Pled with her was more like it. With a year of reflection under his belt, Duke had explained his side of things, asked if she'd consider meeting in person, but she'd refused. "Whether you know it or not," she'd said, "money and status matter to you. You'll be happier with someone like Sylvia." The words never had rung true, but that didn't matter. What he'd done had left a lasting impression, one he hoped to, after all this time, dispel once and for all. Duke glanced around the interior of the jet once more. "It's not very original to focus on the whole money thing. I think it's genius," Perry said. "Yeah, you would." Duke paced the length of the jet's den. A long leather sofa stood to his right, a flat screen and wet bar at his left. Stuff like this doesn't impress her. "You don't even know her anymore," Perry said. Duke slowed his pace, eyes settling on the diamond-crusted base of the ice bucket. "I know her well enough." His pulse picked up as he pictured Vivi's hypnotizing brown eyes, the way she'd reacted to him at the meeting. He'd watched her shift from polite to pissed in 0.2 seconds. Talk about intimidating. As it was, Duke was barely stomaching his first taste of humble pie after the whole twin swap thing. Now he chanced eating more of it, possibly a hefty serving right to the face, courtesy of the one and only Verita. "What time did you say she'd get here?" he asked, ducking to glance out at the runway. "About 10 more minutes." Duke was starting to regret his habit of arriving early. In business deals, he used the extra time to soak up the environment, get acquainted with his surroundings, and often use them in some way to help close the deal. Even on the Benton family's TV show, The Lion's Den, Duke would arrive early, absorb the energy of the live audience from backstage, and muse on the struggling businesses he hoped to score over his siblings. But having to wait for Vivi to show was putting Duke on edge. "You are so lucky she said yes to this," Perry said with a sigh. "This is going to be a life-changer. Mark my words." Duke had no doubt that it would. He just wasn't sure which ways it would change. In the week that had passed since their meeting with Slipper magazine, he'd spent night after night stewing over the pros and cons of doing the article. The odd thing was, his focus had taken a drastic shift from the moment he'd seen her No matter how hard Duke tried to focus on his public image, it kept darting back to the same place like a stubborn compass. Forget his plummeting popularity and damaged image. All he could focus on, all he could think about, was getting a second chance with the woman herself.
Ambivalence. It wasn't the first time Viv had gone into an interview dominated by the emotion. While flying to Austin, Texas for her job with football legend Tom the Bomb, a man made infamous by his chauvinist persona, she worried he'd only prove the public right. Viv had known that being a female would give her an advantage during her time with him, allow her to experience the way he spoke to her, looked at her, and treated her when no one was around. Would his obnoxious manner go on behind closed doors? Or was it all just for show, keeping up with an image? She compared it to how he treated the somewhat awkward makeup artist who blushed every time he looked at her, or the way he spoke to their waitress at his favorite steakhouse. In the end, Tom the Bomb wound up being one of her few subjects who came out looking worse after the feature. Sure, she'd discovered, and written about, plausible explanations as to how those views formed back in his youth, but even that wasn't enough to redeem him. "I can't believe you're going to Costa Rica," Mom came from the speaker. Viv glanced at her phone mounted to the Mazda's dash. Her mom, bless her, had been repeating the sentence every conversation they'd had since she told her about the trip. And still, Viv had to agree. Sparks of excitement sputtered through her. But it only added to the unease of it all. Viv forced herself to release a slow exhale and loosen her grip on the steering wheel. I can't either. She'd already gone through the security at the main airport, which had given her access to the property designated for private personal aircraft. Almost there. She tuned into the inviting warmth of the sunlight on her shoulder and exhaled again, slower now. Her heart followed in reluctant obedience, a more paced and even rhythm against the seatbelt strap. Here your dad and I felt bad about taking the boys to Disneyland without you, and now you'll be soaking up sun on an island in Costa Rica, with Duke Benton. That final thought unraveled the sense of peace she'd harnessed in a blink. Yep, it's crazy. After the breakup, despite the anger and the hurt, Viv hadn't been able to rid herself of the feelings she had for him. So she'd stored them away instead. When Mom wanted Viv to get rid of her stuffed animals as a kid, she'd place them in a box and set them in a corner in the closet. The act put Viv at ease and showed her that, while they were still close by, she didn't need them after all. Eventually, Viv allowed Mom to give the box away. She'd used a similar application with the overflow of emotions that threatened to paralyze her after the breakup. Viv had visualized cramming the unwanted feelings into a lockbox, securing it nice and tight, and pushing it to an outer edge of her heart. Only Viv hadn't gotten rid of Duke's box quite yet. It was still there, a safe distance from the central matters of her heart, sealed shut and locked tight. "You've never seen the rainforest, have you?" Mom asked. The question pulled Viv from her musings. "No, not yet. I can't believe you get to travel for your job," Mom continued. "You've been to New York multiple times, and Texas when they shot on that cattle ranch for the football player." Viv nodded. "And France, for Janine LaBelle," she added, recalling the misunderstood model. They'd been in a hurry for that one. "Sadly, we had to go from the airport to an 8-hour shoot outside the famous tower, then back to catch our flight out." "Yeah," her mom said. "I remember that." "The twins were, what, maybe 5? Viv nodded. "Sounds about right. We took them to see the rodeo that time," Mom said. "Your dad bought them cowboy hats." She smiled at the fond recollection, but all too soon her mind drifted back to today's destination. This trip really would be different from the rest. 5 full days in Duke's multi-million-dollar vacation home on a private island in Costa Rica. Riley Shea said she wanted Viv to get a good taste of what a vacation for Duke might actually look like. Was he the sort who'd fill his spare time with work and tell Viv she could do the same? Or was he the type who'd, despite his countless demands, make time for fun while he was away? Viv had only just hugged Dante and Diego goodbye less than an hour ago, but as she neared the private part of the airport, her mom let them holler one last goodbye before ending the call, leaving Viv with her thoughts once more. She'd spent the last week mentally preparing herself for the interview with her ex. It was different from her routine preparation. It had to be. Prior to coming face-to-face with him in the green room last week, Viv had steered decidedly clear of the famous billionaire bachelor. Call it natural preservation, if you will. Was she supposed to let down her guard all in one day, invite him back into her heart and head? And even if she decided to only let him back into her head, she couldn't avoid it, after all. Who really held the key to the box in her heart? Viv's approach to the project had been one of great and purposeful design, sort of like immunity by exposure, gradually increased doses leading up to the days she would, inevitably, spend with him. It was her job to research her subjects before the interview, after all. A process she started by reading the online stories, articles, or posts with the most traffic. On day one, she spent 1 hour reading what in-your-face tabloids had to say about him. Just 1 hour. And even still, she dreamt about Duke that evening. A disjointed dream where he showed up on her doorstep selling framed photos of himself. She told him no thank you. On day two, Viv doubled that time, sticking with the tabloids again. They were most read, after all, reading the ones dating further back in his career. He appeared in her dream that night too, showing up as her waiter at Bizzoli's Deli and Pub. Dante and Diego were there too, and in that dream, Duke hit it off with them, an act that made her mama heart melt even after she woke. And so it went, until she'd subjected herself to a full 7-hour research binge that felt a whole lot like stalking by the time she was done. She'd been in love with him once, after all, and she was dreaming about him now too. Fortunately, the dreams hadn't carried into the subsequent nights, but to her annoyance, Viv had begun thinking about him enough in the waking hours to make up for that. Still, at this point, Viv couldn't make heads or tails of what she'd read about Duke. Sure, he appeared to be a reckless playboy with a taste for the nightlife and very beautiful women, but there hadn't been a whole lot to support the image. Not when she divided the amount of photos she'd found with the number of years they spanned. Perhaps what his PR said about him was true. Viv followed the long road onto a large tarmac as the side of the private jet came into clear view. It was a rather attractive aircraft, sleek, bold, and intimidating, just like the owner himself. Another round of flutters stirred low in her belly. A man in sunglasses greeted her a few dozen feet from the jet. Viv rolled down the window as she approached. "Miss Tripoli," the gentleman said, "that's me." She propped her own sunglasses on the top of her head. "Please, park the vehicle, and we'll get your things loaded onto the jet." She wasn't sure who we meant, until another man stepped out of the nearby parking garage. "Conrad will take good care of your vehicle," the man added. Viv tried to ignore the odd sense of embarrassment she felt at the royal treatment. At least there wasn't a red carpet leading up to the entrance. "My name's Bruce," he said as Viv popped the trunk. "Hi, Bruce. I'm Viv," she said, shaking the hand he offered. "Mr. Benton has already arrived. Your flight should take off in approximately 10 minutes. Sounds good to me." "Thank you." Bruce gave life to that whole built-like-an-ox thing, a look Viv had never been drawn to. She preferred a leaner, muscular build, tall and toned. Just as the thought occurred to her, Duke Benton appeared at the top of the stairs, a picture definition of that very thing. If he was wearing a full-on suit earlier, he'd removed the sports coat and was now down to the navy slacks and a crisp white shirt, one that accented the muscular shape of his broad chest. Luckily, she'd learned to see far beyond appearances. But even still, her face flushed with a wave of heat at the sight of him. At the nearness, too. She dropped her gaze to the grip she had on her handbag and prepped herself to lock eyes with him through a shaky breath. Just why did her heart have to pound out such a frantic rhythm? Viv had no desire to be so affected by the man from her past. It hardly seemed fair after what he'd done. "He's just a guy like anyone else, Viv. Get over it." Yes, she would. She'd view him as she did any of her subjects, with interest, kindness, and only traces of intimidation over the status they'd earned. Besides, Duke was the one who should be intimidated.